Okay, hi everyone. It's such a pleasure to welcome you with us tonight to start off our webinar, The Anti-Racist Education We Need, Lessons from CT Students and Teachers, sponsored by Students for Educational Justice, Hearing Youth Voices, and the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective. Rashonda, are you there?
I am here. Hi.
Hi, Rashonda. So Rashonda, you and I are gonna co-host tonight. And I have a question, Rashonda. Have you ever decided to hold a party and you hoped a few people would come and then you looked at the list and it got a lot bigger than you thought?
Yes, yes.
That's happened to you?
Well, it happened today.
Yeah.
When we began thinking about doing a webinar last month to lift up so much of the amazing work that youth organizers and teachers were doing in our state around anti-racist education, we were hoping to bring about 100 people together, but today we had to cut the registration off at 560 people.
Whoa, 560?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. It's exciting for us. You know, the organizer, Ella Baker, she always talked about that we should always be looking out for our people, our people, the people who share our vision and want to work together and realize it. And I think that's why we're so excited that so many people here, I think, might be looking for their people. We thought about this vision of bringing together teachers, teacher educators, students, youth organizers, who had this idea that anti-racist education wasn't just about adding a book here or doing a one-time training there, but it was about transforming all schools from top to bottom, from every grade level and subject. School climate, funding, everything, and that it was about students and youth organizers and educators working together, learning from one another. We're all teachers and learners. So welcome to the party tonight. We hope our listeners and participants are going to find some of your people and join some of the groups in the collective, and we'll explain more how in our wrap-up. For everyone out there, we hope this panel of amazing youth organizers and teachers that we'll hear from in a moment will leave you with concrete ideas, opportunities, and inspiration to take back to your classrooms and schools in the fall. And we're gonna have a chance to hear from you in the poll, chat, and others. So Rashonda, you're the Executive Director of Students for Educational Justice. It's part of just a remarkable set of youth organizing groups across the state that many people may not know about. Can you tell us just a little bit about who we're gonna hear from today?
Sure. So we have one of our alumni members, Benny Ntumbo. She's with Students for Educational Justice. We have Lizette Perez, who is with Hearing Youth Voices. And we have Bridget Rivera, who is with Connecticut Students for a Dream. So all three of the organizations mentioned have been working towards anti-racist teaching and learning in Connecticut, along with some of our other partners throughout the state. And then we also have an amazing group of high school teachers with us tonight. Ruth Terry Walden is a teacher from Stanford. She teaches at West Hill High School. We have Marco Sinabre. I'm so sorry, Marco, if I butchered your last name. Marco's a high school teacher in New Haven. He teaches at New Haven Academy. And then we have Natalia Bragansky, who teaches in New Haven as well at Metropolitan Business Academy.
Fantastic. So Rashonda, you're going to get us started in a moment. I just want to say in terms of format, we're going to do 2 rounds with our panelists. In the first, we're going to ask them to share some very specific parts of their work to help them build, to get us thinking about how to build the anti-racist education we need in our schools. And next, we're going to ask them in a second round to share some really specific suggestions and resources for folks in our audience about anti-education education practice. And just look, one last reminder, this is our first big party. So if the chips and dip run out, something doesn't go exactly according to plan, we appreciate your patience. We'll get it right. We're just so happy to have you with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Rashonda, for our first poll question.
Okay, so I am going to launch a poll, and I hope everyone has the opportunity to participate. Give me just one moment. Okay, so the first question is, who are you? Who do we have in the room? So if everyone would just take a moment.
I can see them coming in, Rashonda.
Yep.
They're coming in.
All right, we're at 79% participation, so I'm just gonna wait a couple more seconds so everyone has an opportunity to chime in. All right. So let's see, 28% of those that are here are students. 57% are educators or administrators, 14% identify as parents or guardians, and 28% are community members. All right. Wow, so we have a great cross-section of folks here. We also wanted to take this moment to welcome people to use the chat. I see that that's already happening. You can share your name, where you are watching from, and you can also share resources and connect with others through the chat box. We know you can't see one another, but trust us, we have an amazing group of people with us tonight. And then just a couple of other housekeeping matters. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, please just drop those into the Q&A box. We have folks that will be monitoring the Q&A, and so once we open it up to questions from the community, we will be drawing from that box. Keep in mind, as I said, that we have over 500 people registered, so we may not, well, we probably won't get to every question, but we will try to, get to as many as we can. Also, we want to let you know the call is going to be recorded, and it will be on the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective website. We will share that website with you at the end of the panel today. All right, so let's get started. Benny, I have a question for you. You were among the group of students who began organizing in early 2019 from across the state to support statewide legislation around expanding African American studies and Latinx studies in all high schools. But the groups, which included Students for Educational Justice, Hearing Youth Voices, Citywide Youth Coalition, Connecticut Students for a Dream, and others, who told the legislature very specifically that the course should focus on histories of race and racism, and the anti-racist social movements and struggles and communities that arose in response. Why did the groups want a course that focused on race and racism? And what concerns did you have if the class did not focus explicitly on race and racism?
Yeah, we wanted the course to specifically focus on race and racism because we felt like schools don't teach race and racism, which is weird because we live in a society where race is very prevalent. It dictates a lot of aspects of your life. And especially in a country that enslaved Black people and then subjugated them, segregated them, did all sorts of kind of things to, make sure that they understood that they were inferior and not human. It's very strange, not strange, obviously, but, strange that we're not taught about race and racism in schools. And it's important that we learn about race and racism in classes so that people can identify when they are experiencing racism, when they're being racist, and our biggest fear that if this wasn't implemented or if it wasn't implemented without our amendments would be that, teachers aren't first and foremost prepared to teach this content. So if our amendments didn't get put into the bill, which they didn't, there's a very, very high risk that the content that these teachers are going to be giving to their students will not be well informed. They won't be as effective, and they won't be as sensitive to the lives of their students, the backgrounds, the histories, the social conditions that we're currently living in. So yeah, that was our biggest fear, and it's still our biggest fear today.
Wow, great. Thank you so much for getting us off to a great start, Benny. Lizzie, I have a question for you. You're with Hearing Youth Voices, which is based in New London, and was also involved in the coalition around the statewide legislation that's been going on for several years. And you've been working on a framework you call Schools That Work for Us. It's a great reminder that anti-racist education must involve changes in all aspects of the school, not just the pedagogy and curricula. Can you talk to us more about what this framework is and what its vision is for anti-racist education?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Lizette. I've been working with Hearing Youth Voices since my senior year of high school. Hearing Youth Voices to me is like a big family where we make revolutionary change through collective power. I started there after I decided enough was enough, and why I do this work is mainly because I want to make communities better that value and respect human life and actively stand up against racial injustices, which is exactly what Hearing Youth Voices is all about. So Schools That Work for Us is a framework that members of Hearing Youth Voices created to embody all the primary issues students see within our educational system. It works to put marginalized students at the center to give them a more representative and anti-racist education. We started in 2012, where Hearing Youth Voices started compiling research and data surrounding school issues via surveys, interviews, hundreds of youth meetings, and after those 6 years, we created Schools That Work for Us in 2018. Basically what we did was we compiled the research and we divided it up into primary themes, 8 of them. So as you see in the chart, we have the struggle, collective power, relationships, freedom to be and to move, full safety, mental health, teaching and learning, and resources as the primary things that we need in our schools. Overall, it's not just a framework, but it's a long-term policy agenda. Read it and you will find listings of hundreds of issues that Black and Brown youth have discussed for years, and you'll see 100 solutions and recommendations that we give in our website. But overall, I think my important point to make about anti-racist education is that we simply can't understand how our education system works without understanding its origins and our country's history. And that's something that Hearing Youth Voices definitely went into. Shout out to Chelsea and Itza, our 2 founders who gave us a workshop teaching us about the important history. And basically we learned the truth. The truth was that US power and wealth was built on the enslavement of African people and the stealing and killing of indigenous land. And the educational system is one of the many examples of systems that exist today as a result of our nation's history. And it led us to reality that educational system was not designed for us. It was not designed for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, immigrant, poor, youth who speak other languages, LGBTQ youth, and disabled youth. And we're being asked to succeed primarily in a system that wasn't designed to help us succeed. And that's really why Schools That Work for Us was created. And then to my second point, I'd like to add that part of the problem with education now is deficit thinking when it comes to our youth. The truth is, our young people have solutions too, and we're experts in our own experiences, and it needs to be cultivated, recognized, and respected in order for our educational system to really improve. And lastly, on anti-racist education, I think we can't solely focus on curriculum within schools. We have to think about culture within schools and outside of schools. For example, right now, Hearing Youth Voices, we're working on #FedUpNewLondon campaign. And it revolves around the theme of freedom to be and to move. We're working to defund the police and invest in our communities by using the police budget to go to services like hospitals, mental health services, and education. I think a link should be in the chat. But pretty much it exemplifies how closely Hearing Youth Voices works with the framework and how it's supposed to expand more than just within schools. Overall, this isn't just about police. It's about respecting students. It's about removing security guards and cameras, removing the culture of restriction and control that exists in many of our schools. And eventually, we plan to make a platform called Communities That Work for Us as a continuation of Schools That Work for Us. And we hope that extends in the broader community and, again, not just in schools. And so overall, we look forward to working on this and especially continue to work with others to craft legislation on the state level.
Thank you, Lizzie. That was very informative, and I just want to highlight one of the things, one of the many important things that you said, which was that young people are experts in their own lives. And so we need to keep that at the forefront as we continue to do this work, and including the voices of young people and the conversations that we're having and the decisions that we're making, especially pertaining to young people and students. I'm going to move on to Bridget. So Bridget, C4D has been a leading voice and champion for undocumented students in Connecticut. What have you and C4D been fighting for in schools in regards to access for undocumented youth? And what is your vision for an anti-racist educational system?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you so much for the question. I think one way in which C4D has been fighting for an equal access to education for undocumented youth is through their college access program. There is a big need for proper training for counselors to be able to support and also empower undocumented students. And too often, students are left without any support in overcoming the barriers that exist within our status. For those who do remember the college admissions process, it is a difficult and very stressful process, and undocumented students are simply left behind to figure it out by themselves, and it only makes the process so much more difficult and even perhaps impossible for some students. There's not enough counselors who know how to aid undocumented students, but there's also not enough social workers who know how to help them. And when there is help for undocumented students, unfortunately, there's also only a constant narrative that is being pushed onto the community and the narrative is the dreamer narrative. The dreamer narrative pushes students to unrealistic expectations where only good students will be able to make it. But what does that truly mean at its core? It implies contributing to the capitalistic system that dehumanizes us and aids white supremacy. Our lives do not need to be validated through being good students. Our lives do not to be, we don't need validation through being good students or good workers, because we need to be seen as just human beings that should be the same, that should receive the same quality of education as any other human being. I would also like to add that another barrier that undocumented students face is the English speaker learner program is also being defunded and is scarce. Thus, Connecticut Students for a Dream is fighting for undocumented students through their college access program and fights to provide proper training for counselors to be able to help this community, and breaks down the concept of the dreamer narrative and encourages undocumented youth to bring awareness to their issues that they face by a community, and just bring awareness to a general public.
Thank you. Now, C4D also really believes that students and youth have to be at the forefront of these campaigns. Can you say a little bit more about why?
Yes. I think that we can really make an impact by working collectively with our community. And it's hard to engage folk with youth organization, but we are able to build power through our campaigns. And over the years, by building relationships and connecting with our community, it has helped us push more legislations that favor undocumented students. And it truly has been youth leading these campaigns. And given how successful they have been, although they have taken some time, but they have succeeded in the end, it only shows the power that the youth hold in just leading change in general.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really important. And I know, hearing youth voices and certainly Students for Educational Justice share in those sentiments, each being authentically youth-led organizations. So it was so great. Thank you, Bridget. It really gets us to think about all the forces that shape our schools and the lives of students beyond teaching, and beyond the curriculum. So before we turn to the teachers, Dan, we have another poll question for the audience. And so if the audience will give me one moment, I am going to launch another poll.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you so much, Benny, Lizzie, and Bridget, for getting us off to that great start and just that reminder of how big the vision has to be to hold schools open. Okay. Here is your poll question before we turn to the teachers. In your high school or middle school, did you ever get to take a class in Select All That Apply? Black, African American Studies, Latinx Studies, Ethnic Studies, Asian American Studies. This is your middle school or high school. Native American Studies, Anti-Racist Studies, or none of the above. Heck no, but I wish. We'll give you another minute or two to finish this out. I mean, a second or two to finish this out. They're all coming in. So we want to hear about what your experiences were in middle school and high school before we turn to the teachers. They're coming in, Rashonda. It doesn't look good. It does not look good, Rashonda.
I know. All right, we've got about 82% participation, so we're just going to give it a few more seconds. You want to hear from as many people as possible.
All right. I think that might be it.
Okay. Do you want to end the poll?
All right, there we go. All right. 12 of you had got to take a course in Black African American Studies, 4 in Latinx Studies, 4 in Ethnic Studies, 2 in Asian American Studies, 3 in Native American Studies, and 1 in Anti-Racist Studies, and 194, almost 90%. None of the above. Heck no, I wish.
Wow.
I think that's really setting us up to think about both the moment we're in now and how all the dramatic need we have and the need we have to listen to students and teachers about how this transformation can take place. This also, before we go, it reminds us, we had this quote put up by James Baldwin, who gave a talk called A Talk to Teachers in 1963, who said, and the reason is that if you are, can we go back one slide there, Jason? Thank you. If one managed to change the curriculum in all the schools so that Black people learned more about themselves and their real contributions to this culture, you would be liberating not only Black people, you'd be liberating white people who know nothing about their own history. Next. Can we get the next slide, Jason? And the reason is that if you are compelled to lie about one aspect of anybody's history, you must lie about it all. If you have to lie about my real role here, if you have to pretend that I hoed all that cotton just because I loved you, then you have done something to yourself. You are mad. And Baldwin shared that with us more than 70 years ago, almost 70 years ago. And we see the conditions today. We're going to turn to our teachers now. And thanks for participating in the poll. And Natalia, can I bring you in?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay. So we're going to share some of the work you've done. And Jason, I just want to also make sure that the audio is on for this, so we'll get to hear that. So Natalia, you're a social studies teacher at Metro High School in downtown New Haven. And this year you taught one of the first classes ever in the state that integrated African American and Latinx studies, even before this new legislation Rashonda and Betty talked about was implemented. So you and your students also developed some really interesting research and public history projects that get us all thinking about the hidden histories in our communities. So we're gonna share out this map of the African American, Latinx, and Indigenous virtual working tour of New Haven. But can you just tell us a little bit more about this work and how the students put it together?
Yeah, absolutely. So the work began with researching, the first step is for me to learn this history because this isn't history that I was taught in my own schooling. From my participation in the poll would have also been, I would have been with the 90% that didn't learn these histories about New Haven or about, suburbs of Cleveland or anywhere in the United States. So the first step was for me learning this history, which involved doing internet research, but also going into the archives at the New Haven Public Library, the local history room, and then compiling a list of as many sites as I could. And there's so many more that can be added too. So I really welcome folks' suggestions. And, you know, historic people, events, places within New Haven. And then students chose the one that they were most interested in researching and found credible sources. And they wrote these descriptions and found images and wrote captions and then plotted them on this map. And then we shared it with folks both virtually, but also we invited guests to come into the classroom and actually go on a virtual walking tour around the class that we sort of arranged chronologically. So students got to be the historians, the experts. I would say, you know, building off what Lizzie said, that students are not only the experts in their own lives and their own education experiences, but they can be really experts of their city, experts of their history. And so, you know, they got a chance to share that with their peers, with other teachers in the building, and with guests from the community. And yeah, we've been building off of that with the next part, the walking tour that I think you're going to share as well.
Great. Yeah, so and we'll switch over to that, and then I want to just ask you questions about both of them. So we know that you also worked with a smaller group of students to produce a virtual walking audio tour of the Dixwell neighborhood of New Haven, which is one of the most important centers of Black life and community historically and today in the city. So can you tell us a little bit more about this project, and then we'll listen to a short entry of one of the tours.
Yeah. So for, you know, we wanted to take the map to the next level, right? Folks can explore the map, but to actually go on a walking tour, you can't go to all the sites if you're going to be walking around because it's spread across New Haven. So we chose two neighborhoods. We've got one for Dixwell and another for the Hill, and both tours begin in those neighborhoods and then end on the green. And as you can see, there are several sites. And students, so a group of 6 students, after we left, you know, our physical school buildings, we continued also throughout the summer working and researching and recording audio and compiling it here so that we could share these 2 walking tours of, again, Dixwell into downtown and then the Hill into downtown. And yeah, so we're looking at an example from the Dixwell tour here.
Okay, and Jason, let's hear sort of this.
In 1831, Peter Williams, a Black minister of a New Haven church, and Simeon Jocelyn, a white abolitionist, came together. They had the idea of creating a Black college in New Haven, which they referred to at the time as a Negro college, which we would now call an HBCU. They announced the idea on September 7, 1831, at the Center Church on the Green. When Mayor Kimberly heard about the idea, he called for a town meeting to oppose the college.
Okay. Thanks, and I think that goes on to explain there that it was a group of lawyers and Yale faculty who prevented a Black college from opening in New Haven. So this was all done remotely, Natalia, and maybe can you just say a little bit about, like, it just seems like you're not just adding a story here to the traditional history curriculum. You're really, the students are reimagining their role as scholars and as scholars whose work is important for the public, not just for you to read as a teacher. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that is so important to me as a teacher, to create, to support students in creating projects that have authentic audience, right? Because I think that's, you know, our schools aren't separate from the rest of the community as we like to, or as for some reason is often imagined, right? So students getting to engage with their community by learning about it, but also by sharing their knowledge with the community is really important. And then I think students can really see themselves as the experts that they are, as educators, as historians, and can see a future for themselves as educators and historians, because we know that we need more youth of color to feel that they can become teachers and teach in public schools, and even teach in the very public schools that they attended. Then we wouldn't have the issue we have today, where in New Haven public schools and in most cities across the country, most students are students of color and most teachers are white.
So actually that work has to start not just at the teacher recruitment time, it can start with the very practice in the school. Just one last follow-up question, Talia. I think I've heard you talk before about how projects like this also can change students' relationship to the places they inhabit, live, and circulate every day. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I often, so when the students shared in the classroom, I was kind of bopping around and just tuning in here and there. And one of my favorite comments that I've shared before with you is hearing a student who, plays basketball all the time at a park, which he now has learned Frederick Douglass came to that park to speak to the 54th Regiment as they were, going to fight for the end of slavery, a Black regiment here in New Haven, in Fairhaven, and saying, I heard him say to someone, I get shivers now when I walk in that park, knowing that Frederick Douglass was really here at this very site, and I think history like that and like pride of the place that you're from is really important.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalia, for sharing.
I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
Because I forgot, and I'm glad that I didn't let it go, is that hearing from the students directly, I think is really vital. And tomorrow, the voice that you heard in that recording was Damian Dillard. And tomorrow, Damian Dillard and another recent Metro grad, Imani Cotton, will be on WNHH with Lucy Gelman and with me talking about these very projects. So you should all tune in at 1 o'clock WNHH, or you can hear it later, so you can hear from them directly.
Great, thank you for mentioning
One
that.
quick question for Natalia. Were you asked to teach this class, or did you present the idea?
I would say I presented the idea, but I think the legislation passing, and that is the work of Students for Educational Justice and Hearing Youth Voices and C4D, that's all to you, is what made it possible. So a little bit of both. With standing, on the work that you've done, I was able to propose it and make it happen.
Great. Thank you, Natalia. And I just want to, two other things that just to acknowledge, Natalia also raised money locally. So the students that worked on this project outside of their schoolwork got stipends and compensation for their time, which is, I know, a really important principle for you. And we'll announce towards the end that Natalia is going to do a very a condensed kind of workshop for teachers who are interested in place-based pedagogies and lessons. That's going to be, I think, Monday, August 10th, and we'll send out a sign-up sheet. It'll be a two-part workshop as well. So thank you, Natalia, for sharing that great work. And I have to say, when I went, I learned more from the students in 45 minutes about the city than I had in many, many years here. So thank you, Natalia, for that.
Same here, Dan. And I'm born and raised in New Haven, so it was amazing.
They taught me too, so I'm with you all. Thank you so much.
Marco, can I bring you in now?
Yes.
Great, okay. Some people, Marco, they might think that, they say, okay, I'm right on board with anti-racist education, and they think mostly it's adding a book maybe to a reading list, or going, a district requires us to do a 2-hour professional development workshop or something to change your, an individual habit of mind. And I think you have a different perspective. So can you first talk, before we get to some examples from your classroom, what is it from your perspective that makes an anti-racist educator? What does that mean to you?
Loaded question.
Small question.
So first off, as illuminated prior, an anti-racist educator must first be educated on the history, nuance, power, and complexities of race and racism. And in the traditional education route, this could be perceived as like extra work, but as Benny illuminated earlier, her school did not teach race and racism. Lizette said identified schools were not for us, and everyone in the poll, 194 people, didn't have any of the education within their own experience. Now, this is generations of people, different demographics, all coming to this same understanding. So if you went through the same educational system that put us to the need for this workshop and ongoing things to this day, in which we are going out of our way to do, and then I'm gonna reiterate, it's going to take necessary work. Secondly, the majority of educators in this sense that I've come across, well, not the majority, but many, think about race and racism just through an interpersonal level. The fact that if I am if I, in general, like treat people equally, or in this case, like if I don't mistreat someone who's another color, or racism is this fact that like treating people differently based on their color, then if I do the opposite of that, that could be anti-racism. And that is dangerous, especially within education. Racism has to shift to thinking about it from a structural level immediately. And you got to think about it through the sanctioned practices, actions, patterns, behaviors that enact the marginalization of Black, Indigenous people of color for centuries, and being sure that you avoid the repetition of this. So first off, you had to develop a really nuanced and ongoing understanding of race and racism. That's one. Secondly, you got to dedicate yourself to reflection, especially as an educator. You got to think, with my informed understanding of race and racism, to what extent am I perpetuating these same patterns? And this isn't just, like you said, this isn't just the books. It's not going to take Google Latinx author, put it in front of students, and you're good to go. This is your interactions with students. This is your policies, your parent phone calls, and everything else, your speech. And even in the grandest level, and it's complex, even if you practice anti-racism with a reflective, most informed lens in your classroom, think about your school. If it has AP honors or reading scores, those are derivative of eugenics and other ways to marginalize Black, Indigenous people of color. So how do I come to grips with this? How do I come to grips with the fact that there is this ongoing structure and I must operate from within those? And that's where critical consciousness is developed, where now you have to make an informed decision based off the lens of reflection, your knowledge that you now have in your informed lens of racism, and make decisions that are against these patterns and go against what has been marginalizing students of colors for centuries.
Yeah, and I quickly want to also add on that, because that's a point that I wanted to make sure that I made during this panel, which is that anti-racism education isn't just about like curriculums and pedagogy. It's all about the whole education system and like how it's structured to perpetuate racism every day, which is why, you know, I say like anti-racism education must be feminist, anti-capitalist, anti-classism, all of those things, because all of those things are also encapsulated in the education system.
Thank you, Benny.
Thank you, Benny.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Benny. And thank you, Marco. I know you grew up in New Haven. You went to New Haven public schools. And so a lot of your pedagogy and practice reflects your experience as a student and raises many of the questions that Benny just spoke to. Marco, would you mind talking to us then about some of the ways you bring this about in the classroom, some of the ways you help students kind of decipher this idea of colorblindness, how you get them to join them in creating a classroom in which people can think more critically?
Yeah, so one of the first things is developing shared language in order to speak about race and racism and power and everything that's there. So this is just an example. If you can hit the animation so the text pops up. One more time. I didn't even know these are still animated. So for instance, like I had students read and annotate Audre Lorde's text, and through this we have a shared definition of power and just a way to talk about race and something to refer to. And now with this, alongside many other texts, students then developed a more nuanced understanding of just like everything, just their own identities and also race and racism and stuff. So we start with a shared point. And then if you could go to the next slide, here's just like a quick activity. Yeah, next, please. All right, so here's just an example of the activity we did. Taking the concept of the mythical norm and putting it against the naturalization test, the study guide that's like on the immigration website of the US, and just putting in conversation. Look at all the questions and studying the constructs of the test. Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, George Washington. Yet when answers are with Black, Indigenous people of color, it is naming war or things that are relation to violence or slavery and these other things. And now thinking about the construct of a test, it is meant for you to be able to know your knowledge in like whatever it is that you're doing. And in this case, it's literally becoming an American. So putting this in conversation with a mythical norm and talking through race and power and everything else, it's just a way for students to discuss and just be open in their discussions and kind of learn about this together. Another example, if you hit the next slide. Here's a quick activity in which I had students Google like famous American. If you do famous American writers, the first thing that pops up in Google, what do you literally notice about almost every single part, every single person here? But then when you fill in famous African-American writers or famous anything else, and that's when you start to see the Black, Indigenous, people of color. So when you first, by this sense, by just putting in American, literally everyone within a mythical norm is what pops up. And it is only through when you add another piece of identity, even though we're all American, is when others pop up. So next slide. And these are just projects. So I have students express, well, one, they go into deep reflection about their own identities, their own socialization, their liberation, and everything else. And I had them express through whatever means. Some told stories, some wrote essays, others did art, others did videos and speeches. But in some kind of way, they present to each other. I'm really conscious about this, that students are constantly talking to each other, meeting new people, opening up about shared experiences and telling stories. And then in talking about their work, they have to talk about their conscious choices. Why did I make this choice? What's it related to? How do these stories intertwine and connect? And ultimately putting in conversation with the text that we're front loaded to for the beginning. But yeah, there's many ways in practices, but these are just a few tangible examples. In that sense.
So much, Marco. This is so rich, and I think just showing us, to put Audre Lorde and her brilliant understanding of how whiteness operates as a mythical norm next to the U.S. naturalization exam, to put that into dialogue together and to give students this opportunity. So this is really, really rich. I wonder what, just as a last quick question, Marco, you talk often about students being kind of co-leaders in the class. Could you just say something very quickly about that?
Yeah, well, in co-learning in general, a lot of teachers at times need to have the absolute answer and funnel kids through those. But in looking at even Students for Educational Justice and Youth Hearing Voices, it wasn't the teachers that came together to coalesce and demand change in our curriculum, it was the students. So I'm humble in this sense that I am co-learning and learning things alongside kids. I know as much as I do, and I'll present the information. What I won't do is, in this case, is ever hinder you from actualizing your own power. So I position myself as a co-learner and ask questions that even at times I have to sit in discomfort. I literally don't know the answer of why the citizenship is structured like this. Well, I do know the answer, and I don't have a solution for you. And in this case, we're in this together. And with that power dynamic, it completely shifts just the classroom in general, the environment, the relationships, and everything else.
Great. Thank you so much, Marco. We'll look forward to coming back to you with some other thoughts on how you create this. That was just spectacular. We want to welcome everyone.
Some wonderful comments, by the way, Marco, in the chat box regarding your work.
Yes. I'll definitely take a look.
Thank
you for illuminating that.
And maybe, Rashonda, we can go to some questions after we hear from Ruth Terry. And for folks that just joined us, this is our webinar, the Anti-Racist Education We Need. I'm Dan Hosang. I teach in Ethnic Studies at Yale. Rashonda McCollum is the Executive Director of Students for Educational Justice, and we have an amazing panel. And Ruth Terry, can we turn to you now?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We have you, Ruth Terry.
Okay.
Okay.
What you're looking at, what everyone is looking at, are the makings of protest quote. I got the idea, not my own original idea, Threads of Resistance, which is a website that uses art as protest and protest literature. I have to give a shout out to the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition, because that center and Thomas Thurston, who's the education director, who I've had a long relationship with, has really transformed my teaching. I became an anti-racist protest literature teacher through working with Thomas very closely and the center. I'm listening to Marco, I'm listening to Natalia in terms of how do you do this? How do you integrate this into an existing curriculum? And I was looking at Marco's slide, and Marco, a good example, an excellent example of this whole notion of how to use primary source documents and history as a gateway. Yeah, you can teach about Benjamin Franklin, but what I teach about Benjamin Franklin is that Benjamin Franklin also had a runaway slave newspaper. And so if you want to introduce children to the pivotal players of American history, let's introduce it, how you do this as a young teacher is use primary source documents to your advantage. And so I have my children look at all of the things that the normal textbooks say he does, and then I use primary source documents, i.e. the runaway slave advertisements from his newspaper. And so you can't criticize me for not using primary source documents, because I am using primary source documents. But I'm providing more information to the students so they begin to see our quote unquote founding fathers for who they really were. This is another example of using a protest quilt to talk about racism. As you can see here, this is teaching children about the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. And as you can see here, on one side of the slide, the children are looking at, they put down some, blacks as it's part of this chain gang. You see the KKK, you see the lynching tree, you see them jumping and running to freedom. And so this is a way for them to crystallize American history on their own terms. They get to do these quilts once a week. We have one period where they work on their quilts. The rest of the days they're brainstorming, they're trying to figure out, what do they want to add to their quilt, what do they want to take away from their quilt. We use contemporary pop culture in our classroom. I taught the concept of protest literature to my students, and they brought me a video, Childish Gambino, and they said, Miss, can you incorporate this into your lesson? And so we put it on, we looked at it, we talked about it, and so I asked them, so how is this protest literature? They were able to explain to me in vivid detail the connection between protest literature, primary source documents, the history of oppression, gun violence, and how music, contemporary pop culture, how they're able to access and use their language, their music, their gateway into reality and how they view the world through and bring it into the classroom. And they're able to have that validated by a teacher who speaks their own language, who understands and respects what's important to them. And that's really the key. As an educator, you have to understand what's important to your students and find a way to integrate it into what you're teaching. Otherwise, you disavow who they are and what their reality is to them. And that's very important. Does that make sense?
Oh yes, Ruth, that's wonderful, and you jumped in. I didn't get to share with people just the long record you've had of developing this practice as a teacher in Stanford, and it's clear just from looking at this. I mean, your appointment is an English teacher, but you're doing historical documents, you're doing creative practice, you're far exceeding the narrowness of the boundaries you've been assigned. I wanted you.
Can everyone see this image here?
Yes.
Okay, this is an image in which the student, I asked the student, we study slavery, and so I said to her, is there a contemporary issue that you think parallels with slavery? And she said the current immigration situation, because we were talking about DACA, and DACA was in the forefront, and there was the current administration trying to take DACA away. And as you can see, she has a slave or a black man superimposed on a butterfly, and the butterfly is, of course, the universal symbol for migration and immigration. And so this right here is another example of how you use contemporary pop culture, how you use protest literature and art as a gateway for learning. As you can see, she's got Mississippi Delta, and she's got freedom, and she's got all of these images which are so crystal clear in terms of what really matters to a student. And so you have to allow students to access information and to validate what's important to them with what you're teaching them using primary source documents and history. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, okay. I'm struck how each of you are also thinking about how these histories relate to one another, how histories of migration and enslavement, how in the maps, Black and Latinx histories are located together, how Marco is thinking about Black feminism and U.S. nativism, all put into dialogue together. And it raises, Benny's points about history, thinking about resistance as well, not just adding a few figures onto the margins. Can I just ask you one more question, Ruth Terry, which is, you've also, it's the same question for Marco about students as co-facilitators in the class, and just why that's important to you.
It's very important to let students, I like to say, drive the car. In other words, I try to give students the car keys as quickly as possible and let them drive the car. And my job is to ride shotgun, if you will. And if you allow them to tell you what they want to learn, what's important to them, and let them bring in the things that they want to talk about, if you're on top of your game, you're able to integrate traditional text and find history that matches that. And because you want children to understand that American history repeats itself. In other words, what we're dealing with right now, we dealt with right after the Civil War during Reconstruction. We dealt with it in 1919. We dealt with it in 1943. That was every generation of young people born in this country who understands oppression rises up and has to say enough. We can't take this anymore. And so what I try to show them is that you're standing on the shoulders of your ancestors who did this. And so now I'll teach you what they did. Now I need you to show me what you want to do to raise your voices in resistance. And so when you allow them to be a part of history, when you allow them to bring their in, drive the car, if you will, that fosters student engagement. They have their stakeholders. They're the major stakeholders in the classroom, and that's so important. Is to make students the major stakeholders in a classroom.
Thank you so much for that. And there's lots of enthusiasm and gratitude in the chat, and longing to be in all of your classes, which have been denied to so many of us. Rashonda, so thank you, Ruth Terry, and we'll do another round in a minute. Rashonda, do you have some questions you want to pull out from the Q&A?
I do, but before I do that, I just want to say to say thank you to Ruth, because you talked about like validating what is important to students and to remind students that they're standing on the shoulders of their ancestors. And that was one of the pieces I know from SEJ's perspective, Students for Educational Justice, when we wanted this course to be taught on the history of race and racism, we wanted it to be taught in the spirit of liberation. So it's not a course that is just about the same handful of people who, come up all the time, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, etc. We wanted it to highlight all of the amazing contributions that BIPOC folks have made to this country and also globally. So thank you for highlighting that piece, because that's really important when we talk about this work and when we talk about anti-racism. So I'm just gonna pull out a couple of questions from our Q&A. One question is, as a parent, I'm working with my kids' school. It's a K-6 school, and we're looking for an anti-racism curriculum for our school to adopt. Can someone share a list of curriculums we can adopt? Also resources that involve the parent body. So maybe we can, I know at the end we do have some resources, but maybe we can start to share some of those in the chat box. And if anybody else wants to respond.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, for the teachers also, as you hear about those requests, like how do you respond to them? There's in our moment now when people really want this to happen right away. What are some of the first steps for schools that don't, and also for Benny, Lizzie, and Bridget as well?
Dan, I'm going to address that. We talked a little bit about this. You can't do this as an island. You've got to have comrades in your department, in your school, your administrator, your superintendent. I have been lucky in that the current superintendent, who is a fantastic African-American woman, Dr. Tammy Lucero, has been very supportive of me as a teacher, as a mentor. My administrator has been very, very supportive. The district has been very supportive. We created a text expansion committee for district-wide literacy curriculum. And so I am very proud to say that we have a major textbook that is part of our curriculum that covers all 7 continents. We have Southeast Asia, we have Latin America, we have the Caribbean, we have Africa, we have the American South. We just put Jane Walden into our curriculum, Giovanni's Room. So we have really opened up our seminal texts in our department and in our district so that children see themselves and they're able to access who they are through literature. And from the literature, we use primary source documents and historical documents. So work with your colleagues, bring your colleagues on board, tell them you can't do this by yourself, and that explain to them that it's about student engagement in the classroom and student learning. And whatever engages children should be explored. Never, ever leave a stone unturned when it comes to student engagement.
Thank you. Are there others that want to take up this question, or Rashonda, do you want to take another question?
I do want to take another question. Can you speak of ways of countering organizational resistance, especially with administration, teachers who have not historically viewed racial and ethnic studies as integral to education?
And maybe, can I ask, maybe Benny or Lizzie wants to talk, or Bridget wants to talk about your experiences with school administrators and how to deal with that? Lizzie, can I invite you to go?
Okay, I'm sorry, who are you asking? Lizzie's talking?
For Lizzie, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in my experience, I definitely think in the same way that when working a teacher, it has to be with comrades, it has to be with colleagues, I think the same thing is applied for students. The more students are speaking out about it, the more students are bringing awareness to it, they're coming to the administration and saying this is what we want, the more that we will be heard. In my own experience, being part of More Than Words at my school and hearing youth voices, numbers really do make an impact, as well as forward action, as in making plans and saying like, we have solutions, listen to them. These are the things that we are creating. These are the things that we want in our schools. And sometimes even continuing to push that. As far as my own experience, I've had to really continue to be there and not give up on what we want and make sure that it's heard. Sometimes basically what we say is if it's not direct yes, it's a no. And until we get a direct yes, we got to keep going, keep pushing to make sure that what we want in schools is done. And it's for our students. It's for all of us.
Yeah, and I also want to add, like, that was a great point, like talking to students. Like, students, if you get them passionate enough, they will ride with you. Trust me, I've been on the other end. Also, like, if you're a teacher and you're facing so much pushback from your administration, I think that's when organizing comes into play. Like, there's so much pushback, I can't do anything. Like, come on, talk to your comrades again, like, start organizing to get this into your classroom because it's so important that we need it.
Spoken like true organizers.
That's right.
Bridget, do you want to jump in about your experiences with C4D?
Yes, in regards to my own experiences with pushback, I think it does have to do a lot with what my colleagues have also said, that there needs to be a lot of persistence within the work that you do. I think if there's a will, there's a way. I'm sure there just needs to be a lot of passion for the work that needs to be done. And of course, to not give up, because the change can happen, and it just has to be, you just have to be willing to keep pushing for that change. And students, I know with my own personal experience, students, if you get students to rally up together, or just put that little seed in their head that they are, just constantly encourage them to be the leaders that you know they can be, it will just make them take that opportunity upon themselves to do what they must to get that education that they want.
I also like to add in social media, to not think limited, think that we can connect not just within our schools or in our communities, we can connect other states. We can make something that's bigger than what we imagined. And I think that's the key, is never to think that you're limited, to think that you're unlimited in what you do.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. We have another question. To all three teachers, what are other teachers' reactions to your efforts?
Who wants to start us off? Marco? And maybe you can use it to talk about how you and Natalia are also organizing teachers, as is Ruth Terry, but maybe you can talk about that work.
I mean, in regards to stuff with anti-racism, a lot of one of the reasons this has to exist is because it currently doesn't much in schools. So there's silence, confusion, interest, and there's also people who oh wow, I really like what you're doing and want to learn a bit more. So the reactions actually, they vary. So yeah.
I want to say that I create this work with other teachers. I've never, especially at Metro, shout out to Leslie and Julia and Steve, shout out to Chris Willems, folks who are always, they're in the teacher workroom, or back when we were in the teacher workroom, working together on our projects, and constantly getting each other's input and feedback and making the work better with each other. Oh my gosh, I think I see Jasmine Jones snapping, and wow. Jasmine Jones is a Metro grad and a future teacher, and I can even think of times of collaborating with her. She was a teacher's assistant in my contemporary law class. So yeah, collaboration with other teachers and with students means that folks are on board because they did it with you. And then just building off of what I shared earlier around, students presenting their projects, they present their projects to other teachers at our school. And so I don't even have to tell some of the other teachers about the work because the students show it to them and they learn from the students directly. And the students are undeniably brilliant. And so you just can't disagree with it. And I do want to say, in terms of your question, Dan, that Marco and I, even though we're not at the same school, are organizing along with Fauna and at NHA and Leslie at Metro. And we're hoping to keep organizing, opportunities for teachers to come together and learn with and from each other. And honestly, there's a lot of New Haven teachers in the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective, and that's really been a gift.
Yep. One other thing Natalia just made me think about was the constructs of the question. I assumed hey, in my own school, but yeah, collaboration outside, I talk to people from other districts and even other states, from Texas, California, and kind of see what they're doing in terms of what's in line with the work. So it's just, it is cool to show your work in front of people in general. So it generates more synergy, new ideas, and not even in the same content. I learned from elementary schoolers, math teachers and stuff, just to see what I can get. So yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Ruth Terry, go ahead.
There are two things. I just want to say I work in a very radical department, and our department has the we have the good fortune that every student comes through our department for all 4 years. And so during those 4 years, this one department has the ability to impact children over a sustained period of time. And so what we do is we start in 9th grade trying to create the anti-racist department, subject matter, foundation for these children, and it sustains them through to 12th grade. So when a whole department is on the same page, that has that one philosophy that works wonderfully well. Because we are a radical department, we branch out. We are advisors to various clubs. 2 of us are the advisors to the student newspaper. 1 of us does the yearbook. So in other words, we branch out and we allow children to express themselves in all aspects of student life. And so that's really what it is. Again, it's about letting the students drive the car. In other words, if all of us have hands on these students, if all of us are anti-racist teachers, over the course of 4 years, they're going to understand what it means to be an anti-racist individual, because it's been modeled for them over a sustained educational period. The other thing we do is that we branch out, and we do webinars like this. We participate in educational outreach, global outreach. We share our best practices, and that's so important. And modeling who you are as an anti-racist teacher is the best way to be an anti-racist teacher.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rashonda.
Thank you. I think at this time, we're just gonna move into the second round of questioning. And so, Lizette, I wanna ask you, can you tell us about the new survey that was done throughout the state of Connecticut with all of the organizations that are members of the BBSU?
Yeah, of course. So basically how BBSU came about, just a short little history brief, is in 2017, Hearing Youth Voices, CT, Students for a Dream, Grow Hartford, and Citywide Youth Coalition came together to form a statewide coalition called the Connecticut Black and Brown Student Union. And this is a place where we fight together for rights, dreams, and demands of our youth in our state. So pretty much this year, youth from our group wrote a survey to ask other youth about their experiences with race and racism in CT schools. In May and June of this year, 18 young people from our groups came together to outreach the survey. And overall, we got 879 responses, so yay. And I'm not going to read the slides, but you can see that we got responses from all over the state, and a majority were Black and Brown youth. So overall, in response to the question of what our schools need and in the survey, here's what the 879 youth people had to say. They said mainly, 1, too many worksheets and not enough interesting learning material. 2, not enough learning about Black, Latino, Asian, and Indigenous cultures and histories. 3, bathrooms are locked during the school day. And that's actually for a lot of schools. And 4, not enough Black, Latino, and other teachers of color. And 5, there's not enough mental health support. And finally, for 6, it's the dress code policy that is very restricting on many students. So I just want to lift up those voices in terms of what our school needs and what the survey said. And pretty much, our young people have answers. So let's listen to them and follow their lead.
Thank you.
And before we go on, would you, Lizzie, just say something about what the next steps are of this project, or what you might do with it next?
Yeah, right now we're still working on it. We're still meeting together and trying to see what the next steps are. But most definitely, once those are figured out, those will be out in the media. So we'll definitely get back to that.
And I just want to say that I mean, it was amazing to have so many responses for students throughout the state of Connecticut sharing their voices on what's happening in their schools. And so we're really looking forward to as we continue to aggregate and disaggregate the data from those surveys to better understand, what's happening in different areas of the state and what, our students are finding as issues. And we'll be really excited to share more of that information as we continue to work through it. Dan, do you have a question for Natalia?
Yes, I do. And I also just want to say, to lift one thing out, I know another question the students asked was, who were the teachers and staff and administrators and guidance counselors in their respective schools who were important to them, who were resources, who supported them. And that was also so heartening to see such a big list and a wide-ranging list of folks all across the state. We're in our last round of questions, so we're just going to keep these shorter. I'm going to turn to you next, Natalia, and then we have lots of resources for everyone listening in about ways you can plug in, you can support, you can get resources. We're going to do that in the last 5 minutes. Natalia, I just have a quick question for you. You wrote recently an op-ed in the Washington Post that was published. It concerned an issue that's on everyone's mind now, the return to school, whether it's going to be done in person or remote. the health considerations, the considerations of life and death around that, and the racial equity considerations. Could you just say maybe a quick thing about the op-ed, and then just about your thoughts about teachers and students as leaders in shaping educational decision-making and policy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important, you know, the pandemic has been revealing so many truths that a lot of us have already known, but some people are just realizing right now. And I think when it comes to schools, we're seeing, you know, here's the beginning of the piece where Governor Lamont is saying all of these things have to happen in schools and they must reopen. Now he's since shifted his views, and because of the organizing of teachers in solidarity with families and students. But he's saying that all these measures will be implemented if feasible, right? And this concept of feasibility and what is feasible in certain schools and not others. And we see the ways that the underfunding and ongoing segregation and unequal funding that's based on property taxes it means that our schools, certain schools can do things that are, you know, wonderful and beautiful and life-saving, and other schools can't. And we still find ways to do those amazing things in our schools, but our lives and our students' lives should not be on the line. So, you know, this is a moment, I think, number one, to refuse to return to schools that are not safe for our students and safe for our staff and safe for the larger families and communities. And number two, it's a moment to realize that working together in coalition, that students, staff, teachers, educators, families, and communities, we are powerful and we are strong, and we need to demand that our schools are fully funded. And we shouldn't return to schools that are racist and built upon a racist system. When we return, we need to fight until we return, and when we return, we need to fight for schools that are funded the same across the board and that actually allow for the opportunities and the types of curriculum and the amazing teachers that we're talking about here today.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you so much. And we'll put the link for that in the chat as well. Rashonda, I think you have a question now for Benny.
Yeah, so Benny, can you talk a little bit more about just some of the other things that SEJ is working on, Students for Educational Justice, in addition to the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective that we're working with?
Yeah, so right now we are currently working on addressing the tech divide through Wi-Fi distribution for students, so students are able to get Wi-Fi now that they're at home and going through virtual learning. We are also working on the beginnings of a police-free school campaign in the fall. Should we return in the fall, we'll be working on trying to get school resource officers out of our school. And we'll also be, we're having a panel, right, about that soon in the fall. And we're also focusing on school reopening with a focus on racial equity, so that we ensure that students are, if they have to go back, that they're going back in a safe environment. Oh, we also have a summer intensive happening right now. Actually, some of our members in the intensive are watching this right now. Hey guys, in which we provide organizing and political education, so that these students can learn about all the systems of oppression that rule our society, as well as how to organize to dismantle these systems.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And then we're also, just one other coalition that we're working with is the equity and e-learning. So ensuring that students have, we're anticipating that COVID is going to come back and schools will likely close again. And so we're just ensuring that there's equity in virtual learning once and if we return back to, fully virtual learning.
Thank you, and thank you. Before I just turn for a last quick question to Ruth, Terry, and then to Marco, just to note the some are intensive, and I think Hearing Youth Voices has one of the same. This is the tradition of freedom schools that are being done this summer in many locations in Connecticut. Make the Road Connecticut is doing them. So that tradition is alive and active in our backyard. Ruth Terry, can I just ask you to speak quickly about, you've also been a longtime organizer, leader with the Stanford Teachers Union, and the role that teachers unions might play in supporting and advancing this work.
I think that, well, for me, collective bargaining units or teacher unions are especially important to younger teachers. Younger teachers, particularly those teachers who don't have tenure, who are trying to develop their teaching paradigm, look to your collective bargaining units and to your teacher unions to provide you with the support and freedom that you need to really understand who you are as a teacher and to grow and develop without fear. And I think that's the one thing that holds younger teachers back is fear. Fear of losing their job, fear of being reprimanded, fear of not having an appropriate evaluation. And your collective bargaining unit is there to support you. Be wise, in your first four years of teaching because you're very vulnerable, but also don't be afraid to do what's best for your students. And that's where your union comes in and should and will support you so that you can develop professionally into an anti-racist teacher.
Thank you so much, Ruth Terry, for that very specific direction. I think, Rashawn, you have one more question for Bridget. I have one for Marco, and then we'll turn to our closing resources.
All right. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Why don't you go to Marco first?
Sure.
Oh, no, I found it. I'm sorry. Bridget, follow-up question about C4D's current work. What are you going to be doing in the months ahead as school starts, and what kinds of action can people take to support it?
Thank you for the question. So what C4D is working on is a campaign that will help get more funding for ESL programs and, of course, supporting other campaigns that are going to be removing police out of schools and fighting for anti-racist and restorative practices. C4D is also looking to start a campaign that will fight for, I know Connecticut has passed a free community college program, but that excludes undocumented students. So we're trying to fight for the right to just get educated as if we were, regardless of our status. And currently we do have a program for learning about School of Abolishment and where we learn about what is abolishment of like ICE and police and how can we achieve that within our community. And on a larger scale, like apart from school, we're working on a campaign called Husky for Immigrants, which focuses on getting health care for the immigrant community, the undocumented immigrant community, as we're in a pandemic and they're putting their lives at risk through going to their job, but of course they're displaced because they don't have access to health care. So that's what we're working on. And of course, if anyone wants to reach out, you can just look us up on online or through any social platform at Connecticut Students for a Dream.
Wow, that's amazing, and the same kind of freedom school tradition and thinking about abolition and all of those issues. So thank you for sharing that work with us. Marco, just turn it to you to wrap it up. I'm always just blown away by how hard you work to find resources for yourself, to find new sources of curriculum. Can you just leave us with some suggestions for teachers who might be new to this work but are looking for things to help build up their practice and repertoire? What direction and advice would you offer them?
Yeah, so especially anyone who new teacher one and new to anti-racist work too, it's kind of this simple notion of like pick one, like pick one of the many resources, especially now in a pandemic where it's like, here is this obscure link to 1,000 hyperlinks on this, like pick one of those, delve into it and kind of just go from there. And also in general, like even in this workshop alone, I wrote down now what I want to do with watching Ruth Terry's classroom is look for things in which I could involve kinesthetic and art and other stuff and as a form of protest and things. I don't know anything about that, and I think that I've been holding myself back and students back because like there's a whole nother sense of expression that's out there. So if this is gonna sound cheesy, but for real, like if you want to learn it, it's out there. Find people, reach out to boards, any of these organizations, and any of these resource drops. I know myself as a teacher, I experience sometimes paralysis of like, oh, here's 1,000 things, and I walk away from it. But pick one thing and just go from there.
Thank you. And I just noticed that across all of the, the learning from one another that the youth organizers do, the youth organizations do, and teachers as well. We have one last question. I'm hoping just one of the teachers can answer really, really quickly before we do our resources, which is, can just someone talk about the current state of teacher education and whether what you're describing, Marco, happens in teacher education programs now? We've talked about a number of those resources, but if Natalia, Marco, Ruth, Terry wouldn't mind just giving us a quick response to that question from
Al. When I was in school, in this case, I had no preparation. I went to St. John's and zero preparation on anti-racist teaching. And talking to my, but student teachers who are in Southern and other places, I just always get a perplexed look of maybe. So I think it depends which program that you're a part of. But my thing is I don't think that there's enough teacher preparation around this. And if there was, then we wouldn't be where we are right now. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Marco, for that. Okay, Rashonda, this has been an amazing, we're grateful to the panelists. We'll be following up with lots of resources. Rashonda, you want to just, I think we have some slides about how folks can get connected.
Yes, we do. So there were lots of great information and resources shared in the chat box. For young people, if you are interested in working with any of the organizations that are represented here today, our contact information is on the screen. It's a little small, so what we can do is just enter our email address and social media in the chat box. Hearing Youth Voices is in New London, so if you are in the New London area and want to reach out to them, please do so. Students for Educational Justice is in New Haven area, so in and around New Haven County. Feel free to reach out to us. We will all put our information in the chat box, and C4D works statewide, so they're in a few different areas. I do know of Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven. And then we also want to share information for educators and youth student advocates. If you're interested in joining the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective, as Dan mentioned, the collective is made up of young people, so students, community organizers, teachers, and teacher educators. We have, Dan is very modest, but does a lot of work around training teachers. And so, feel free to join us. We'll put our the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective's email in the chat box as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rashonda. And just so to support, engage, follow the youth organizing work, and then just say quickly for the collective, the website is there in the Facebook group. We have this is the new website that was just launched today, and with gratitude to all the students who helped put this together. There's the group is conducting a series of interviews with teachers like Ruth Terry, Natalia, Marco, and many others across the state who also have amazing stories and practices. So we've collected dozens of these interviews and put them together in profiles that students have written up, so you can see those on the website, drill down into those practices we've heard about. If you identify as an anti-racist teacher or educator and are open to being interviewed, and that doesn't mean you have everything figured out, it means you have some of it figured out and you're open to sharing, we have a link there for you to do that. If you're interested in workshops and webinars kind of by and for teachers and with students, we have a link for you to click there. Teacher book discussions that we'll be doing virtually and supporting this fall, especially for teachers. We're trying to think more about finding a community of practice to immerse themselves in, our panelist and email list, etc. So we are grateful to all of these amazing panelists for sharing your work, for the inspiration you provide to us. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. Thank you, Rashonda, for hosting this party with us together. It was lots of fun, and we're looking forward to doing this again with everyone.
Yes, thank you all for joining us.
Okay. All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good